So between 2007 and 2018, only about 5% of Americans used public transportation to get to work. Maybe they like their cars, I don't know. But it should be noted that 45% of Americans have exactly zero access to any public transportation. So it's less about preference and more about not having a choice to prefer. And depending on the cost, commuters are spending around 7% of their income just on gasoline, presumably to put in their cars. On top of that, transportation contributes to a fucking quarter of all CO2 emissions in the world. Public vehicles like cars and trucks being the majority of those emissions. This is more than any other industry like agriculture or energy production. As it stands right now, public transportation in the US saves 37 million metric tons of carbon dioxide annually, and only 5% of us are using it. Imagine if that number was like more, a higher number. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's up to us, the individual, to stop driving. That's something a silly person would say. Because again, most of us simply don't have access to stuff like buses and trains, or at least 45% of us. And those who do might not want to ride them because they're falling the heck apart. Public transportation took a major hit back in the 2009 recession, the federal government only contributing to about 17% of their budget at the time. And boy, things did not get better during this pandemic, as you might have assumed. Meanwhile, cool, hip startups like bike shares are way too cool and hip to actually put their bikes in low-income neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods tending to have less access to public transportation, which, wouldn't you know, is directly related to unemployment. Fewer buses, fewer people getting to work, and so on. So, what I'm getting at here is that America desperately needs to change their infrastructure to prioritize public transportation over cars. Because what happened is that as streetcars grew in popularity between the 20s and 50s, we immediately began to get rid of public transportation lines like Los Angeles' streetcar system in order to make room for traffic. Many communities were affected by this, such as America's then bustling toon towns. But those tunes, am I right? How many pantless ducks does this country really need? More than one? Once the 50s were in full swing, Congress approved the Federal Aid Highway Act that pushed all our funding into an expansive freeway system that we then built our urban sprawl out into. Everything became hinged on cars instead of public transportation. And while there were later pushes toward building up metro systems in a lot of these cities, we didn't do much to maintain them or create a reliable bus system to get people to and from these stations. The result is a lot of people who find it way easier to simply drive to work and use either free or readily available parking garages that most cities have put effort into maintaining. And now that we're post-ish pandemic, this would be a good time to rethink all of that and how we as Americans get to work, or rather, how the people who can't telecommute get to work. You know how there were a whole bunch of people who still had to physically go to work during this whole COVID thing? You might even be one of those essential workers. You might be. Well, those people had to get to work somehow, and one of the methods was the bus. And I don't know if you know this, but a whole lot of bus drivers got sick during this time. In fact, according to a BBC investigation, the amount of British transit workers who have died from the pandemic is roughly the same as frontline nurses. And I bring that up mainly to emphasize just how important public transportation is for a very small percentage of people in this country. And perhaps we should think about doing something for them. Something that could fundamentally shift us away from the urban sprawl centered around our highways. And literally, all we have to do is drumroll sound. Pay a little more money! That's it! Look, there are a lot of other conversations we should have about buses and public transportation. Many people, including myself, think that perhaps it should be free. Electric buses would also be great. These are two great ideas. Oh, I wish those ideas would just already. But right now, as we move toward those goals, the extremely simple solution is just for the federal government to give a little more money to its bus system. Like, not even that much. At the moment, we spend about $12 billion a year on public transit, which mainly gets the majority of its funding from farebox revenue. But the Urban Institute estimates that if we spend an extra $16.5 billion annually, we could more than double our transit capacity. And for comparison, $16.5 2025 is over 30 billion less than what we spend on car infrastructure per year. In the context of government spending, it's not that much at all. The military spends more than 17 billion just on their air conditioning. And that's literally it. According to one estimate by the advocacy group Transit Center, just a 40% increase in service in a city like Atlanta could expand their routes from this to this. Here's a similar comparison for Denver, and here's one for Cleveland, a city also plagued by the obscene duck menace. These are potential transit routes that would arrive at least every 15 minutes, too. And from these estimates, they found that a person living in Atlanta would have access to 50,000 more jobs within 30 minutes of their home. For reference, that number is currently 6,000. And again, just 40% more service. It is silly simple. It's also what other countries are already doing all of the damn time. As opposed to American suburbs being designed to accommodate cars and highways over all else, European towns made sure to design their city and residential grids around buses and trains. If you live just outside of Munich, for example, you could walk to a residential bus stop right near your house that would take you to an S-Bahn station of trains that run every 20 minutes and get to the other side of the city in half an hour. And it's not that these countries de-stress their cars either. Germany has the Autobahn for Mayor Pete's sake, but rather that they made sure not to neglect their public transit side during their initial automobile boom. It's not magic, and we're even seeing some cities start a push toward better funding for sustainable and free transportation. Huzzah! Even private companies see the benefit of this and have put money toward expanding buses, albeit buses that specifically lead to their factories. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.